Institute of Governmental Studies, along with my colleague, Professor Christina Mora in sociology. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all today, both our in-person and our virtual audience, to our 19th annual Percy Synar Awards ceremony. Now, for those of you who haven't been to IGS before, we really see our mission as both training and the next generation of civic leaders for America, a generation that looks like and that reflects the great diversity of our state of California in particular, and encouraging the kind of research that addresses the important policy challenges facing our country and the world today. As part of, really in a sense, both of those missions, IGS started these awards in 2007 to support exemplary graduate student and undergraduate student research. Counting this year's participants, we have awarded 78 Synar Awards and 98 Percy Awards. The Mike Synar Graduate Research Fellowship provides 3 outstanding graduate students with a $3,000 research grant, and the Charles H. Percy Graduate Research Grant for Public Affairs Research awards 4 outstanding undergraduates with a $1,000 grant. These awards really played a critical role in helping IGS fulfill its mission of helping our community and the nation gain a greater understanding of both American politics and California politics. Now, I want to, in particular, thank and acknowledge Bill Brandt and Patrice Bougalis Brandt's role in establishing these awards. These grants were created and have been sustained over these 19 years by the Brandts, dear and generous friends of IGS. Bill Brandt, who passed away in May of 2023, was a stalwart supporter of IGS and our programs. He actually launched our National Advisory Council many years ago, and is an NAC member and its longtime chair. He really helped steer IGS through really challenging times for the university as a whole, ensuring our ability to thrive. He was also, on just a more personal basis, a friend to each of us here at IGS. He was always, even though he was probably the busiest person I ever met, his travel schedule was just, unbelievable. But with that, he was always ready to take the time out of his schedule to talk with us, check in about what was going on both at IGS and with our families, and to offer his sage advice. So we miss Bill dearly. Now, one of Bill's many lasting legacies for IGS was the decision that he and Patrice, who is joining us today remotely, made to create the Percy and Synar Awards. Now, a lot of people, when they create an award, they want it named after themselves, right? Bill and Patrice, that's not what they want. They thought about particular leaders who they saw as inspirational models for young people today. And so Mike Synar, congressman from Oklahoma, was a congressman who worked closely with Bill on bankruptcy reform legislation and was really a kind of profile of courage as a legislator from Oklahoma, who kind of famously lost in 1994 in a primary because of his support for an assault weapons ban. The Percy grants are named in honor of Senator Charles Percy of Illinois, who Patrice worked with as press secretary. Percy was a Republican who, again, showed tremendous courage, coming to Berkeley at one point and speaking against the Vietnam War. He was also one of the first Republicans to call on Richard Nixon to resign during the Watergate scandal. These were both outstanding public servants focused on finding bipartisan solutions to difficult problems, and they were not afraid of taking political risks to do so. They point to a model of public service that we need more of in this country, and by supporting some of the best Berkeley students, Bill and Patrice have helped nurture a new generation that will live up to that ideal. So I want to thank you, Patrice, for your and Bill's support of these grants over the last 19 years, and for being such steadfast supporters of IGS and our students. And so I'm going to turn things over now to Patrice, who's going to offer a brief greeting to us all, for our audience.
Thank you so much, Eric. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you in person. Am I set up, Ezra?
Pulling you up now. There you go. We can see you.
Okay. And you can hear me, right?
Lovely. You sound clear. You're good to go.
All right. Well, thank you, Eric, very much for that introduction. I am sorry that I can't be with you here in person today, but I appreciate that you all went to the trouble of allowing me to participate by Zoom. Neither Bill nor I nor any of our children or grandparents or parents attended Berkeley. Bill literally sort of stumbled into his relationship with the university and brought me along for the ride, which I always benefited from because that's the kind of partner he was. We always said that we got more out of it than we gave, and I still feel that way very much so. Our ability to interact with the professors and the staff of the IGS and the opportunity to get to know the students through the awards ceremony, really, we always left so optimistic and hopeful about the future and where the country was going and the world was going. I couldn't fathom not seeing these programs continue. And I'm really happy that we've been able to do that. One of the things that we have always asked of the students is to remember that as you move forward, that you reach back and help others behind you. Bill and I always had benefited from that as we were growing up, and really felt it was important that we also try to help kids behind us move forward. And there's no better way than through education. I believe that even more strongly today than when we first started these awards 19 years ago. And I think the other thing that's important, that the kind of research you do gives us greater knowledge about how our systems are working. It's not necessarily a criticism when we find fault with the system, but if we didn't bother to investigate and see where those faults lied, how were we ever going to make improvements? So the research you do, the issues you bring and to everybody's attention, and the more you learn and continue to do that, the whole country benefits from it. Eventually, those ideas get spread, and people learn from people, and things can get better. So remember to reach back. Bill would always also remind you to thank any other people who personally supported you, like families and friends who helped you get to where you are today. And really, congratulations for all your hard work and your determination to keep learning, investigating, and sharing. So I now am going to give it back to Eric, and I'm very eager to listen to your presentations about your studies. Thank you.
And looking forward to having you here in person, hopefully next year. So today we'll be hearing brief presentations from all of our awardees. So I'm going to introduce the winners of the Percy grant, our undergraduate grant for public affairs research. And then Christina, Professor Mora, will introduce the winners of the Synar Graduate Award. And again, just a reminder, the Percy grant is for research on students engaged in research on an aspect of American politics or public affairs broadly understood. All right, so our first presenter is Sabrina Avenido. I'll just host.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? Good. Yeah. Yay. Awesome. So again, thank you so much to the IGS team, to everyone who's made this grant possible. And for my community today, my name is Sabrina Ashley Jamedes Avenido, and I'm really grateful to say that I'm one of the awardees of the Percy Grant undergraduate research grant. And my senior honors thesis and the research that I will be presenting to you all today is Utang na Loob, a family affair into civic education and engagement. And just to prime everyone as to why I started this research, as Filipina X and O's have been immigrating to the US since 1587, continuously shaping American life in fields ranging from the healthcare industry to the arts, Filipino Americans play a critical role in disrupting the model minority and perpetual foreigner stereotypes that continue to challenge their identities as Asians in the diaspora. We notice shifts in how second-generation Filipino Americans have embodied resistance and persistence. As the children of Philippine immigrants, they mirror their family's immigration story, sacrifice, and pursuit of the American dream. Moreover, they have also become a bridge between the West and the motherland by helping their parents make sense of the new labor, health, economic, and political contexts in which they have now immersed themselves in. Filipino immigrant parents must arguably then learn another language, US policy. Despite being away from home, Philippine cultural values remain prevalent transnationally, such as Utang na Loob, a debt of gratitude. This shapes how they move as a family unit politically. So with that segues into my research objective. So my research aims to explore how second-generation Filipina XO Americans, which I'll be referring to as SGFAs, raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, have internalized and exercised Utang na Loob as a form of resistance to the lack of civic education and engagement in immigrant households. More specifically, I will explore how SGFAs take care of their loved ones through civic education of local, state, and/or federal policies that continue to impact their parents. By holding qualitative kwentuhan talk story sessions, I hope to highlight the nuanced experiences of Utang na Loob in the family home with regards to U.S. civic education and engagement efforts from SGFAs with their parents. So y'all are probably wondering, how are we breaking this down? I know there's a lot of moving parts here. So issues that my thesis will be investigating have been broken down into two parts. One being multi-generational family dynamics. So how are cultural values internalized by SGFAs with respect to their Filipino immigrant parents? And then on the right-hand side, you'll see civic knowledge and civic engagement specifically. How are those cultural values then exercised through dialogue, acts of service, and etc. And some examples that I've kind of put on the screen to really show what it means to exercise Utang na Loob in the sense of civic knowledge and civic engagement. We look at the micro level, which is assistance with understanding and securing mortgages, retirement, medical bills, social services, as well as the macro level as well, which includes knowledge of local, state, federal policies, and registering to vote, exercising their civil rights and workplace rights. And all of this is super important as we talk about political power, right? And bringing that political power to our immigrant communities and how do they best interpret that and that dialogue between the child and the parent as well. So for folks who are not aware of what Utang na Loob is, it's a Philippine cultural value which translates to a debt of gratitude. However, this English translation does not come close to actually encapsulating what it really is. And so it is an interpersonal social norm of social responsibility rooted in Filipino psychology. As Filipinos, we come from a culture of collectivism, a shared sense of self, which translates to kapwa. And it can be an ongoing process, which then turns Utang na Loob from a noun to a verb. And it becomes an ongoing practice. And it can take a lot of forms, especially with families that have migrated here to the West. And it can manifest itself externally through actual debt and expectation. And throughout my literature review, I've seen that it can also create dissonant experiences and expectations within SGFA individuals who may not share the same interpretation of values as their Filipino immigrant parents or their other Filipino counterparts. So an example of how utang na loob can be exercised in this sense, I've put it right here. So elders can put their grandkids through school, and in return, those same grandkids take care of their elders by translating their health insurance and helping them pay medical bills. So I put a little graphic here on the screen just to further conceptualize what this cultural value kind of represents. And this was a 2016 study where they interviewed a bunch of Filipinos back in the homeland on how they internalize utang na loob. And it comes down to 3 themes. So the first one being pagkikilala, which is the acknowledgement of someone helping you out. And then that turns into social responsibility, paglipunan, gampin, and then just recognizing that, okay, someone has done good by me and I should reciprocate to that because we take care of our own, we take care of our community. And that's when it segues to reciprocity, which is pagtutumbas. And with these cycles going on continuously, that's how you create utang na loob. And so for my research methodology, I will be doing kwentuhan talk story sessions. So for folks who are not aware of kwentuhan, it is an indigenous Filipino storytelling method used to preserve history and values and demonstrates how cultural values and knowledge are passed down through generations. It is a decolonial, culturally responsive approach to research by encouraging community members to be a part of the knowledge creating process and therefore embody kapwa, a shared sense of self. And the reason why I decided to choose on this research methodology is because marginalized communities, sometimes having a qualitative interview or having a traditional research method can be intimidating. And so this is an attempt to really invite my community into the research process, because at the end of the day, this is by the community for the community. And so I will be sharing my story with them as much as they share with me, creating that shared sense of self throughout the whole process as well. So for logistics, I will be holding sessions with 15 to 20 participants, ranging from an hour to an hour and a half. And then depending if they really need it, I will be having follow-up kwentuhan sessions if necessary. Therefore, questions and themes I am exploring, some examples are on the screen, is what is your personal understanding of utang na loob? When you hear the phrase, taking care of your parents politically, what does that mean to you? Third, how does utang na loob influence how you support your parents? And lastly, have you helped your parents in one of the following: voting or understanding ballots, explaining policies or political issues, helping them fill out government forms such as healthcare, immigration, taxes, workplace benefits, retirement, education, etc., or even helping their parents interact with schools and different healthcare systems and city and state agencies. So therefore, why or how am I using the grant throughout my research? So not only will I be having an academic part of my research, but I wanted to really bring this community element to it, therefore sounding the alarm back into my community back at home. And hopefully in collaboration with a local nonprofit back at home, the Kapwa Cultural Center, I wanted to present my findings in an accessible manner, whether that's through a community dialogue with them or even creating a brochure or pamphlet, just describing my findings in a more accessible way, because we live as we climb, and exercising utang na loob in my personal way and throughout this research is how I'm paying back to my community as well that have helped me come here today. So, yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Step over so that you're not in the light. So,
okay.
no, step this way.
Oh.
This way. There you go. Yeah. There you go. There you go. Beautiful. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Look nice.
Right. You need a. Okay. It's okay. So next we'll call up Abigail Francisco.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to the Institute of Governmental Sciences and the Brandt family for this grant. Professors, friends, and family for being here today. My name is Abigail Francisco, and my research title is Scripture and the Welfare State, How Christian Rhetoric Influences Social Welfare Attitudes Among Americans. So just a bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a current second year at UC Berkeley, double majoring in political science and rhetoric. I grew up in Sacramento, California, specifically in Elk Grove, and with my amazing family, my mom, dad, and my little brother, and my parents were able to make it here today. My parents raised me and my brother as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, which is a denomination of Protestant Christianity, and I continue to be a devout Seventh-day Adventist today. And as a Seventh-day Adventist, I grew up studying Bible prophecy and Christianity's role in politics, even in elementary school, but I didn't get a full appreciation for politics and law until high school, where I joined my school's mid-court team and then later founded and presided over my high school's mock trial team. And from there, when you combine these two interests, my background and my academic passion of law and politics, you get my interest in specifically partisanship and the rhetorical messaging that it plays. I'm really invested in bridging across divides. You know, in a world where people just debate and yell at each other, how can we really talk to the other side? Really seeing this divide of like the Christian right versus like the atheist left, but you don't have people that fit into those circles. So how do we bridge across the aisle, especially when we're trying to build a better democracy for America? So these interests bring me to, this interest brings me to my research question. How much effect does scriptural messaging have on the way Americans vote? How effective is it compared to statistics? And can it be used to change people's minds on policies? I really want to see what positive role religion plays on politics across the aisle. And so you might be wondering, what defines scriptural messaging? So scriptural messaging can be defined as any time a speaker uses biblical allusions, whether they're referencing a Bible story, they reference a Bible verse, they might be quoting a specific verse in the Bible. Just anytime a speaker mentions religion to establish their ethos and credibility in their argument. For example, we all know Martin Luther King Jr. and his famous I Have a Dream speech. So this is a quote from that: "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." So this is from the Bible in Amos 5:24. So this is just one example of how people are able to use scripture as a message of hope and deliverance in their politics. It's not always a bad thing. You know, scripture is a beautiful message of hope and love, but in the wrong hands, it could be used to weaponize against communities and harm, as many people might see today. But I really want to see how much effect does scripture have on society. And so to test this, I will be running a survey through Prolific using the Percy grant. Respondents will read a fictional news article about an ongoing debate regarding social welfare programs. They will then receive one of 4 primes or a control. For example, they'll get a proponent scriptural prime. So after reading this news article about an ongoing debate about social welfare, they'll get a few details about that. Then they'll read a proponent and an opponent side. So in one prime, the proponent will be using a scriptural verse. And then in another prime, the proponent will use a statistical fact. They might like quote a percentage. And then another prime, the opponent will use a scriptural verse, use the Bible to be against social welfare. And then an opponent could use a statistical fact to be against social welfare, and then an unrelated control. And then after they read their prime, they'll be asked to rate their support of various welfare policies. Might be asked like, do you support this sort of housing policy, or do you support increasing tax in order to fund like EBT and things like that? And I'm doing kind of a reverse methods, where rather than starting with a hypothesis and testing that, I'm starting with my question, testing the data, and then seeing what hypothesis I can get out of the data once I see the patterns through the survey responses. And so because of that, I can test multiple theories on the basis of the responses, and because I have so many primes. So for example, I can see, will scriptural verses prove more effective at persuasion than statistics? Will people who identified as right-wing when starting the survey later kind of show more support in favor of social welfare as a result of getting the scriptural prime? Or maybe I'll see the opposite. Maybe they'll have more support for it as a result of the statistical prime. I can also see if Christians versus non-Christians will respond differently to the primes. Maybe Christians will be affected more by the scriptural primes, or maybe we'll see someone who's not Christian be more affected by reading a Bible verse, because maybe they're not as in tune with the Bible, and so they'll be like, oh, this is interesting. I could also test the difference between right-leaning and left-leaning Americans. Will they respond differently to each prime, and different ages or genders? And so we can kind of see which ones are more prone to having their minds changed on the basis of a fact or statistic versus a Bible verse and like more emotional priming. And after I receive all the respondents, I'll be able to use coding in R and analyze the data, and I'll be able to see what patterns and causal effects that I can draw from this study. So this really matters in American politics today. For one, political messaging. A lot of politicians today, especially in the Democrat Party, have veered away from even mentioning religion. And as I studied in my politics class with Professor Stephen Fish, we've learned that mentioning politics tends to not steer away voters as much as Democrats today think it does. And so it's kind of testing, will it be more persuasive to the American public? Should politicians start using religion a bit more, mentioning their own religious experiences to connect with their audience and to show them like, oh, because I believe in this, because I grew up with this, it really shows that they stand for something. And because they stand for something, then they're going to stand for you. And so testing to see if the scriptural messages will affect the audiences, then politicians could look at this study and say, oh, maybe I should be using more allegiance to my own personal religious life in order to get audiences to vote for the policies I want them to try and vote for, and in order to increase support for me and my politics. So it really shows how they should address their diverse audiences. And at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, partisanship, there's a really big divide in America today between the right and left. And so how do we reach across the aisle? You know, if you're talking to someone with a different view than you, should you just shout statistics at them? Or maybe you can try and speak their language and quote a Bible verse. And maybe on the other side, maybe you shouldn't be so afraid to say a Bible verse when you're talking to someone who's not Christian, and maybe they'll be more open to hearing that. And so just from the results of the study, there's a lot that we can do to reach across the aisle and just learn how to talk to each other better and not just yell at each other all the time. And that really helps for American democracy, and really emphasizing that everyone in America can have different beliefs as long as we're all here and trying to support each other in this community and in this country. Okay. Thank you for listening.
Step to the right.
Here.
To the right.
Is
Huh?
that a order?
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. Sorry.
Awesome. Really, 1, 2, 3. Beautiful. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome up Carla Vicencio Ramirez.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here and accompany my peers and I in this special achievement. I'm especially very grateful to be up here and have the opportunity to share my research with you all. So again, my name is Carla Vicencio Ramirez. I am a senior majoring in sociology and legal studies, originally from Southern California, specifically San Bernardino. You guys are familiar with that is. And the reason why I do research is because I'm interested in using research as a tool to uplift communities. I believe that it is an important and useful tool to just kind of centralize and bring to attention what communities are struggling and going through it, and as well as documenting their lived experiences and reporting the testimonies. And so without further ado, the title of my research is Invisibilized and Pushed Out, a look into young Latina adult civic and political participation in California. So I'm going to first bring your attention to these 3 different charts, and I know they're a little bit hard to see, but in the first chart, it describes the eligible voters in California in the year 2023. And so I have circled, and the Latino bar graph has shown that there are about 8.2 million eligible Latino voters, but this drops down into 5.4 million for those who actually register to vote. And into the third chart, those who actually go out to vote that are Latino identifying drops down to 4.5 million. And so with the start out of 8 million to 4 million, I'm wondering what happens to the other half of the population. And so this leads me into my research question, which is what circumstances contribute to young Latina adult civic and political participation in California? And so why does this even matter? That's another question that I'm kind of like delving into as to why I chose that research question. Why does it matter that half of the Latino population isn't coming in to vote? Shouldn't it be up to them to decide whether to engage or not? And my answer to that is that identifying existing barriers can just break down the barriers and secure political power for Latinos. It can help young Latinos feel empowered and confident enough to take these authorial positions and secure that political power to create the change that they most dearly want to see in their own communities that they feel like, you know, maybe other people aren't doing because they don't understand their culture and what they've gone through and their different experiences. And so additionally, this is way bigger than just voting. This lack of engagement or barriers extends beyond the political realm and into other fields like education, health, employment, and much more. And so I believe that with the leadership of Latinos, they can help fill in the gaps through proper political representation. And so how will I be doing this? This is my methodology. I will be doing 20 semi-structured interviews with 10 college students and 10 non-college students. And my reasoning for this is because I want to do an educational comparison. There's this idea in scholarship and literature when I was doing my literature review that college students are more likely to become involved in just engaging in politics because there's this idea that when students go into higher education, there's this liberalizing effect. And then also I want to do 10 non-college individuals because I believe that it's important to also put in their voice because I feel like when I was trying to find out what they thought about just politics in general, I couldn't find much of that in the scholarship. And so I feel like this is a gap that I found and I want to fill in. And then additionally, other identifiers that I'm looking for, all of the individuals must identify as Latina, 18 to 25 years old, any sexual orientation and gender, and be located anywhere across California. This is because I want to look into and include different ethnicities, Mexican, Central Americans, Afro-Latinos, etc. Yes. And then moving on, these are some of the different question themes that I'm going to be delving into, such as asking my interviewees what forms of civic and political engagement do they partake in, such as do they regularly vote for midterm elections? Do they only vote for presidential elections? And then also what type of civic activities do they engage in? Do they protest? Do they fill out and circulate petitions? And then also what civic and political participation activities they avoid. Additionally, what sources do they get their political information from? Solely from social media. I feel like a lot of young people, when especially my friends, I talk to them, they're like, oh, I heard this on TikTok. I saw this on TikTok. And so not that that is bad, but I feel like social media is a tool that young people are now using. And so another topic is social media and political issues of concern. And then also what impact of culture and community do they have on their political views? And then furthering on, some precautions that I want to ensure the security of my interviewees because I know that today is a very political intense time. And so in order for them to feel comfortable and create a safe space and environment for them, I want to de-identify my participants, make sure that I kind of just use a pseudo name and I'm not using their actual name. And then second of all, keep a passkey over all my documents with any data, notes, etc. And then third, not ask them anything about citizenship. I don't want to ask them about their status, the status of their loved ones, because I don't want them to feel uncomfortable or feel that they're endangering their families by even just trying to engage in this opportunity. Some early findings. So I'm still in the middle of conducting my interviews. I am still recruiting individuals, but I have interviewed a couple. And this quote that I felt like stuck out when I was going through the process of coding was, I feel like this pushing for involvement in democracy, like actively making your voice heard, reminds myself that this country is everybody's. It doesn't belong to one particular elite group. And so this idea of believing that this is everybody's country demonstrates to me that while Latinos do feel this, sense of pushing out from the community, like political community, they are feeling the sense of urgency to still become involved and take up that space and still, just become involved to be part of their communities. And Additionally, another finding is my personal belief is that everybody has an influence on somebody. Sometimes on our younger siblings, our parents, and classmates, like in sharing things or reposting on social media, I feel like every effort counts. And so I really like this quote. It's one that stuck out to me, and I feel like just highlights so much, because in an age where social media and technology takes up a lot of our daily lives, I feel that it's important to understand that the youth are now using social media as their main tool to not only spread awareness, to share tools and tips of how to stay safe with their community members, and also that there's also another great concern that is coming up with them, and that's the measure of security. Some students have expressed that they feel that they do not want to partake in marches or rallies because they're concerned that their face and their picture will be taken and shared, and that they will be negatively reprimanded for even just partaking in just wanting to advocate for their social justice issues. And so I believe that this can kind of be like a double-edged sword. And then I just wanted to say that I'm still finishing up my research, and I can already understand and see how the stories of young Latina adults are important, and how they are revolutionaries in their different ways and different capacities that they can partake in. And so with that, I want to say thank you to everyone who has supported me, my friends, my advisor, and my different teachers. And so I'm thankful for every one of you, and thank you for just being here and hearing my research.
One, two, three. Beautiful. Thank you.
And I'm pleased to introduce our final Percy Award winner, Helia Moini.
Woo! Thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the Institute of Governmental Studies, to my advisor, Professor Schickler, and to all my friends that are here today. My name is Helia Moini, and I'm a senior in the Political Science Department. My research is titled The Calculus of Compromise, Analyzing Legislative Behavior in the Shadow of Constant Media Scrutiny. So while I was thinking about what to research, the first thing that I thought about was what I was learning in school about sunshine laws, and which are basically regulations for government agencies and officials to hold open meetings and public observations, and to make sure that the public can access records. So it basically provides transparency in Congress. Of course, I thought transparency is fantastic. It's the bedrock of democracy, ensuring that we hold our politicians accountable, ensuring that corruption is not rampant. It fosters trust, and it allows constituents to be able to see that the representatives are actually representing their interests. But what if the price is that our government is gridlocked? What if transparency actually shrinks the space for debate and compromise? And what if it provides too much of a spotlight on legislators who are constantly scrutinized? While considering these different ideas, I started with the idea of how media dissemination has changed over time. Since the founding of the US, newspaper coverage was always happening. It was the norm. And then came radio in the 1920s. Then came the household TV sets in households in the 1950s. And then in 1983, the internet was adopted, which opened the door to the digital age. Then with the digital age, we also had C-SPAN coverage of congressional news, 24/7 coverage. Along with that, we had the social media. And with social media and C-SPAN coverage of congressional hearings, we had things like clipping, which we skipped over. But basically, legislators were having every second of what they were saying scrutinized. I think today you can see that anything that goes viral in Congress, like in hearings, is clipped, and there's like songs over it and everything, so the public is widely aware. So along with this change in the dissemination of media, there's also this rise in gridlock that we see over time. So these two trends are happening at parallel rates. Both the public is getting more knowledge about what's happening with our legislators and Congress, while gridlock is also increasing. I thought that this parallel trend was really interesting. And I argue that media attention provides transparency, which affects how general voters, primary voters, interest groups, and donors might act. And subsequently, it actually changes the calculus that legislators take into account when deciding when to engage in compromise or perpetuate gridlock. While considering these things, during my literature review, I found two different kind of themes for the mechanisms for why this might be happening. One theme is that the rational strategies that legislators take are changing. For example, legislators are scared of primary voters who are shown to be more averse to compromise, meaning that these primary voters have a lot of power over if these legislators get elected. Another thing might be that they're choosing to campaign and message in congressional debates and hearings to their, base. And with clipping a thing, campaigning and messaging is such a big thing over like actually having policy discussions. And then there's also strategic gridlock, which is basically one party trying to keep gridlock because then they can blame another party for government inaction and stagnation. The second way that the mechanisms for gridlock that we see today is that the public itself is actually being polarized, and the ways that we consume media has changed us as a whole. One idea is that, one study is that the public has become more averse to compromise as a whole. So obviously legislators are reacting to that and changing the calculus that they use while they're, doing their job. There's also algorithmic distortion, which targets moderate views disproportionately, meaning that those voices are shrinking. And then finally, there's, a fractured factual basis for all the, news that we consume, which means we can't come to compromise because we don't even have a factual basis to go off of. So my interest is not exactly how the mechanisms of gridlock and how that might be happening, but rather if this is occurring. If this is actually occurring, does media attention impact the passing of legislation? My first hypothesis of how this might be happening is that more media attention correlates with increased legislative gridlock. My second hypothesis is that legislation that gets a roll call vote and receives less media attention will be more bipartisan in the vote, meaning that less media attention is more likely to provide a space for compromise. The methodology I used to test for my hypotheses is that I first selected my policy areas, which are education and healthcare. Then I filtered legislation across the past 4 congressional sessions, and I also filtered it depending on a variety of factors to make this study possible. Then I gathered media coverage for each bill and amendment that I filtered for and chose. Finally, I isolated the legislation that got a roll call vote specifically for my second hypothesis. And then once I had all the data, I performed correlation analyses. And currently I'm at the conducting case studies phase. So to move from correlation to causation, I actually decided to use case studies, and that has a whole different methodology that I won't get into today. The news media outlets that I chose are these 5 print legacy news media, which are the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and the Los Angeles Times. I chose these because of their global reach and their long time, since they've been around for a very long time. The second type of media that I looked at was specifically partisan media, Daily Wire and Fox News for right-wing, and CNN and the Huffington Post for left-wing media. I specifically did partisan media channels as well because studies have shown that people who consume right-wing media are more averse to their legislators compromising and actually punish them when voting. My results are not shown here for some reason, but basically the results showed that in the 115th, 116th, and 117th Congresses, the legislation that was not passed actually received more media coverage, which supports my first hypothesis. For the 118th Congress, this trend was actually reversed. So this kind of made me think about basically, what if we need to provide more spaces for our legislators to actually be able to have the freedom to talk and debate without the fear of public scrutiny? Thank you so much.
One, two, three. Beautiful. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Christina Mora, and along with Eric, I'm the co-director of the Institute of Governmental Studies, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our Synar Graduate Research Fellowship awardees. So I'll be doing the grad students. The first presenter is Andrea Lara Garcia.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Andrea Lara Garcia. I am a fourth-year PhD candidate in the geography department, and I'm very excited to present my dissertation research titled "Who Owns the Border? Property and the Politics of Belonging in the U.S.-Mexico Borderlands." Before I begin the presentation, I do want to take a moment to thank the Brandt family, the Institute of Governmental Studies, as well as my friends and family for their support. It is an honor to be in this room and to share my work with you all. I want to start with the story of a person who is described as a migrant in so many news headlines without any additional context. Gabriel Juan was born in a rural community at the southern tip of the Mexican state of Sonora, which at its northern extent borders the United States. Described as a hardworking man by his family, he was a father of 7 who earned his living as a day laborer, traveling seasonally for work and sending money home to his elderly mother. In 2023, Mr. Juan Puitimea was shot in the back by rancher George Allen Kelly as he moved through Kelly's property near the Arizona-Sonora border. Tragically, he died at the scene. Gabriel Juan Puitimea was 49 years old. Mr. Juan Puitimea's death sparked fierce debate over a disconcerting question. In the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, should trespassing on private property be punishable by death? After Kelly was charged with second-degree murder, Arizona State House Representative Justin Heap took advantage of the buzz surrounding the trial to push for a bill that would expand protections for property owners who used lethal force against trespassers. In a speech, Heap noted the measure was needed given the, quote, increasingly larger number of migrants or human traffickers moving across farm and ranch land. Though the bill made it to the State House and Senate, it was ultimately vetoed by Governor Katie Hobbs, who remarked that, quote, the legislation as written values property over human life and incentivizes vigilantism. 2 weeks later, Kelly's trial ended in a mistrial. Mr. Juan Puitimea's death and the controversy that it generated illustrates that private property is deeply implicated in debates over immigration. Conceptually, this link between property and territory, by which I refer to the bounded spatial claims of the state should come as no surprise. Like property, immigration law in the United States has increasingly come to be defined by the right to exclude. This linkage between property's small scale and territory's large scale exclusionary impulse has been the long-standing subject of theorization by geographers and legal scholars alike, who point to similarities in their form, such as the use of fences, signs, and violence to enforce exclusive use, to the incredible political and economic power endowed to individuals through land ownership. The literature on settler colonialism also provides a framework through which to understand how private property ownership became a key tool of colonial domination. Scholars have explored the particularities of this process in the American context, demonstrating that the entanglement of property with racial ideologies was used to justify the dispossession of indigenous communities and supported the emergence of nation-state projects. These works provide us tools through which to understand what happened at the ranch that fateful day. However, there are parts of this story that the extant literature is not well positioned to explain. Settler colonialism as a model is particularly well suited to explain the confluence of property and territory in Anglo-colonial contexts, but the US-Mexico borderlands were first settled by the Spanish, who had distinct notions of property, race, and governance. Furthermore, while there's a rich theoretical literature on how property and territory challenge and reinforce each other in the abstract, there's a lot less written about what the presence of an actual international boundary does to property relations. Finally, many works about the US-Mexico border treat the region as a monolith, where both property rights and federal territoriality are expressed evenly across space. This obscures the reality of wildly diverse property landscapes that exist along the international boundary. For instance, Arizona and Texas's property regimes could not look more different. As you can see on the map, the federal government owns most of the land along the Arizona border, whereas Texas's border has the highest proportion of privately owned land of any border state. Recent legal conflicts between these two border states, Arizona and Texas, and the Biden administration illustrate the real difference property makes in who gets to enforce immigration policy. Within the past few years, both states built barriers along the international boundary. In 2022, Arizona began stacking shipping container walls along the Coronado National Forest, while Texas began installing razor wire fencing along the Rio Grande in 2023. In reading hundreds of pages worth of court filings for these disputes, I was astounded to see how similar their arguments were. Though both states argued that failures of federal immigration policy had driven them to build their barriers, neither state sought to explicitly legislate immigration law. Instead, the states argued that property entitlements and property rights should empower them to make decisions about who could cross the border and how. Despite these parallels, these cases had radically different outcomes. In 2022, Arizona dismantled its shipping container border wall and was forced to pay a $1 million fine to the federal government. On the other hand, Texas's razor wire fence stayed up despite some minor concessions to the Biden administration, and under Trump, several of Texas's interventions have been adopted by the federal government. My research suggests that border property regimes play a key role in determining these outcomes. While the sheer amount of federal property in the Arizona borderlands made it difficult for the state to argue that it had any right to build a border barrier, Texas partnered with private landowners to successfully argue that its private property rights were being trespassed by the federal government. This turned out to be a powerful argument in a country where one's right to property is placed alongside the right to life and liberty in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Though regulating immigration has been the exclusive legal domain of the federal government since 1876, these cases demonstrate how property rights grant a broader range of people, including private citizens, power to enforce exclusion. Through this work, I have found that the US-Mexico borderlands is a rich place through which to explore the myriad frictions, contradictions, and perhaps even opportunities presented by the interplay of property and territory. Indeed, there are instances of land ownership being leveraged by indigenous communities, humanitarian aid organizations, and private citizens to contest federal and state hegemony over the border region, although these actors often have complex motivations that don't always neatly align with a narrative of anti-militarization or pro-migrant politics. With the support of the Synar Fellowship, it is these stories that I hope to capture during my fieldwork in the Arizona and Texas borderlands next year, where I will talk to border landowners, advocates, and residents about how property shapes their understanding of authority and belonging in this place. Ultimately, I hope to understand if we, as scholars and advocates preoccupied with space and equity, must think beyond property in our efforts to create a less exclusionary border region. Thank you.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Great, thank you. Next, we have John Kanicki.
Just set myself a quick timer. All right. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, my audio, okay? Awesome. Thank you very much for the Synar grant. I greatly appreciate it. Came at the perfect time. I've already spent a third of it, and I'm really excited to tell you about it. So today I'm going to be talking about my project as a fourth-year political science PhD candidate. I'm hoping to make this my job market paper soon. And it's about developing a new theory of what drives political polarization in American politics, especially on the right. So to start out, I want to ground this research in a lot of what has come before. This project really kicked off when I got a sense that a lot of the explanations around, sort of dysfunction on the American right, why the right is polarized, what motivates a lot of political conflict, is the sense of status threat, a sense that conservatives feel threatened by being a shrinking white Christian majority, and that the loss of that status is causing them to become sort of increasingly recalcitrant, increasingly uncooperative, and so on. And I would never fully dismiss this explanation out of hand, but I think it's possible that we can add to it in important ways. And specifically, I would argue that this theory really overlooks what is, in my experience, like one of the most prevalent aspects of conservative media and conservative rhetoric, which is an overwhelming frustration with what they call liberal elites, liberal bias, mainstream media bias, academia bias. A lot of those sort of mainstream institutions, conservatives would argue that those are biased against them, and they are not shy about expressing that frustration. And I think that this is emblematic of sort of a deeply held view that has been foundational to American conservatism since basically its inception after World War II. A lot of the foundational works, such as William F. Buckley's God and Man at Yale, are explicitly about articulating these grievances in very minute detail, and they sell like hotcakes, and that continues to this day. Figures such as Richard Nixon, one of their main ways to connect with conservative Americans was to emphasize that they are a silent majority and that they are being overlooked by sort of the media and the elites. And so, given that this is potentially just a very prevalent tendency, I think it's unfortunate that we don't have a measure of this. We actually do. In IGS, Lawrence Rosenthal has this great book called Empire of Resentment that I think does a good job at touching on this. But I think that we can flesh out this concept further and develop a survey measure so we can actually get a sense of how much it matters. And so to that end, I'm developing what I call ideological resentment, which I define as the belief that the opposing ideology has a dominant cultural power, and then a sense of marginalization based on that belief. And I want to sort of make the case for why this is relevant beyond simply trying to measure something that we see in the news. I think that this can help speak to a lot of, sort of holes or limitations in current political science literature. For one, political scientists have for a long time debated sort of how much people actually have policy attitudes, how much they're actually defined by things that they care about. Do they have an ideology beyond just an attachment to a label, what we call symbolic ideology? Do they have operational ideology? And what I want to suggest is that ideological resentment, in a way, is kind of a middle ground between these two options, where you have a lot of people who are symbolically conservative and operationally liberal, and those people present a bit of a puzzle. But if you can imagine sort of the ability to appeal to them on the basis of something like ideological resentment, it kind of makes sense how they can have this identity that has substance, even if it doesn't require concrete policy knowledge, or at least sort of consistent, well-integrated policy knowledge. There we go. I also think that this is really relevant in an era of polarizing institutional trust. This has been going on for decades. It's really accelerated in the Trump era. And I think it's important that we understand why this is happening. In my experience, political science literature tends to treat this as largely a consequence of elite cues. Trump criticizes the media, and Republican voters, concur. And again, I think there's plenty to that. But I think sort of understanding it as more of a generalized grievance, irrespective of whether or not we agree with it, could be useful. I think it's useful, especially in terms of understanding, can we appeal on those grounds to reverse that polarized institutional trust, which I think we should definitely try to reverse. I forgot I had a meme in this, but it does work. Basically, what I see in terms of ideological resentment, I see it as sort of a unifying force on the right, where, increasingly we can tell that the conservative coalition is fracturing along substantive grounds. You have sort of people who really care about free market economics. You have people who are very nationalistic. You have sort of, they're still relevant, but our Bush era evangelicals, moral majority, they're all in the same coalition. They have different priorities, and they even often have very different policy perspectives. And yet they all manage to stay in the same coalition. And I argue that that's because conservative intellectuals and Republican politicians can appeal to this dominant sense of perceived liberal bias, the sense that they are treated unfairly on the basis of their ideological label. All right. So given that, basically, when I said I spent a third of the money, basically this is the result of basically my fourth pilot study, where the first three pilot studies, whenever I was able to get money, I've been testing out survey items to measure this. And so this has gone over a lot of iteration over time. But basically what it is I have 4 items where people choose between statements A and B. Statement A is low in ideological resentment. So people are saying that, conservatives are socially accepted in this country, or liberals are socially accepted in this country. And then the higher resentment statement is a statement such as conservatives are treated as outsiders in this country, or conservative voices are ignored while liberal voices are promoted. So I think we're nearly at the final version of this scale. I want to do one more pilot, a couple more items I want to test, but this gives you, I think, a pretty good idea of what the scale is trying to measure. I'm very happy with it psychometrically. This probably isn't readable down here, but it is very good Cronbach alphas, and then even on very cheap data, I'll leave it at basically it's if the alphas are this good on a lucid pilot, we're doing great. So given that, I have 20 seconds, but to be quick, basically what I want to do once I've established this measure is I want to assess its relationship with other important phenomena. I've been experimenting with this over time, but now that I've got the actual measure locked down, I'm really excited to see how well does this predict affective polarization? How well does this predict things like election denial or sort of a sense of strong MAGA identity? I also want to manipulate it in a survey experiment to see if it has a causal relationship on these phenomena. So if you can reassure a conservative that, oh no, don't worry, the media is not biased against you as much as you might think, does that make them less polarized? I also want to basically assess the impact of ideological resentment compared to other grievances. And obviously, the standard way to do that is to just throw a bunch of variables in our regression and see which covariates pop. And I'm going to do that. But I also want to run a couple of other sort of, I think, more clever studies that basically ask people to choose between various futures in which certain grievances are made better or worse and see through revealed preferences which they actually care more about. And then I also want to track elite level appeals to resentment over time. I showed Nixon earlier, I showed William F. Buckley earlier. I want to see if this gets worse over time, and I want to see if I am correct in assessing that this is very much an asymmetric phenomenon that conservatives harp on. Thank you very much.
One, two, three.
We're good?
All right. Thank you very much.
Last we have Synar Merchant.
Right. Thank you guys so much for sticking around. I know it's warm in here, but I'm really grateful to you all. My name is Synar Merchant, and I am a PhD candidate in sociology. And today I'll be presenting a chapter in my dissertation, which is titled The New Muslim Left, Islamic Theology and Progressive Politics in New York City. So to sort of motivate the project, I want to start with some news that we've all already heard about. And basically, something that I want to ask is, we've heard from some other presenters today about how we're in this moment of increasing ethno-nationalism, authoritarianism, and state violence in America. And at the same time, we've just witnessed that somehow somebody who identifies as a Muslim socialist was able to get elected mayor in the financial capital of the United States. And what I want to do with this presentation is to give us a little bit of foundational context to understand how is it possible that someone like Zoran Lumbani get elected in a moment like this. And there have been a lot of different answers to this question in the news and op-eds and think pieces, but one piece I want to offer to the puzzle and the group of explanations that's been going around is to say that we can understand Zoran partially through a movement that's been brewing that made his election and his victory possible. And I'm tentatively calling this movement the New Muslim Left, because it's basically a movement that is emerging out of a group of progressive Muslim organizers, community leaders, and creatives who are trying to articulate Islam and Islamic theology in a way that speaks to progressive demands that the American left has been fighting for, including affordability, but also speaks to specific issues that the Muslim community in New York is dealing with, including the disproportionate state policing and surveillance of their communities, and also calling for an end to US-sponsored violence in the Muslim world. And I put new in quotes because though this current formation of the movement has emerged in the post 9/11 moment, and especially in the post October 7th moment, the antecedents of this movement have been there, from particular anti-colonial struggles for liberation in the Muslim world, where they were trying to draw upon progressive readings of Islam in order to fight their particular struggles in those moments. But there are also antecedents of this movement in the US when we look at the struggles for Black self-determination through the Nation of Islam. So though in some ways this formation is new and seems novel, in other ways we can link it to past historical movements and moments. And so what I'm trying to do in my chapter is it's a bit descriptive because this movement does feel so novel, but I want to give some flesh and teeth and description to what is this movement? How is it structured? Who's in it? And how did it emerge? So that's my first question in trying to conduct this project. The second question I have is about how exactly is it that the movement is bringing Islam, Islamic theology, ritual, and practice into the political arena? How are organizers integrating Quranic verse, dua, particular aspects of Islamic practice into the political space in a way that we haven't seen before? In order to do this, I will be combining two methods: participant observation with semi-structured interviews. I've also been a participant in this movement myself over the last 2.5 years. So in this current phase, I'm interested in interviewing the organizers and movement leaders I've met across spaces in New York to ask them specifically how they see theology as a force that's influencing their organizing practice, and also how they themselves would define and map the contours and the boundaries of the movement. To do this, I've so far been able to sort of delineate 4 general spaces and areas where I think this movement is coalescing. So the first is maybe the most obvious. When you think about a Muslim left, you might think about political organizations that help Muslim electoral candidates run and win elections. One of those spaces is the Muslim Democratic Club of New York City, which was actually an early political home for Zoran. A lot of people think about DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, as Zoran's original political home, but another place that kind of brought him up electorally was the space of Muslim progressives who are trying to offer Muslim candidates canvassing support and campaign support to be viable candidates who could win in local elections. Some of the other spaces are maybe less obvious, but I think they're equally important in thinking about this Muslim left formation. I included places of worship here because as an attendant at different Islamic centers across the city, I've noted that the way that the imams in Friday prayers are able to bring political questions and messaging to their congregants has also affected the way that the Muslim community has mobilized, not only in a campaign for Zoran, but around other political issues in the city. So some of these places of worship include the Islamic Center of New York City, where the progressive imam is constantly calling on the membership to show up for local electoral issues
and also to use their power in order to support those in New York who are unhoused and unsheltered in ways that are structural and not just individual. The third space that I think is important are also political study groups. I was shocked when I moved to New York to find that there were so many young Muslims who wanted to think about questions of Islam and abolition, Islam and gender liberation, Islam and even Marxism. Young Muslims were hungry to find ways to articulate Islam in a way that it hadn't been categorized or described in media, because what we've seen mostly is descriptions of Islam as being politically conservative and regressive. Finally, I also found that very recently certain literary and creative spaces have been created around the Muslim left. Some of these include Acacia Magazine, which launched last year, which is dedicated to documenting stories and narratives from creatives and intellectuals on the Muslim left. I think taken together, these spaces are examples of the formation of something very new that we're seeing, and I want to take the opportunity that I have as a graduate student with support and funding from the Synar to make this, to document this moment in this movement. I'll end by offering a couple of stakes that I think this movement kind of offers us in this moment. I think the most important one is actually something that one of the undergraduate awardees, Abigail, mentioned, which is that it challenges the assumption that religion has no place on the left. For far too long, there's been an assumption that if religion and politics merged, the outcome of it would be some kind of, intolerant formation. But what I'm trying to show here is that there are cases and movements where the left can take theology seriously as an organizing resource and win. And it's actually really important for people who are invested in the success of the left movement to see it as a place where we can sort of, to see it as like an important resource where we can sort of galvanize renewed energy for our movements. And I think I'll close there. Thank you guys so much.
You're ready. 1, 2, 3. Up.
Thank you.
So now I just want to take a moment for a round of applause for all of our awardees. Show of hands, how many family members are in our audience today? Raise your hands. Yay, thank you for coming. And friends and supporters. Oh, fantastic. I want to also thank our IGS staff, Ezra Bristow, Mary Watson, Christine Trost, and our student assistants, Julian Vargas, Amina Pope, and Star Avila, for helping to plan and support their event. Thank you so much. And of course, I want to thank Patrice and the Brent family. Patrice, we have a full house. We kept adding more and more chairs. There's rows everywhere. Want to thank you for making this possible year in and year out. And I just want to say, just sitting here and listening to all of these projects and all of these presentations, right now is a moment of great uncertainty for many, right? In the nation, in the state of California, and especially in public education. And I think as I sat there and I listened to all of these amazing projects, I'm sure many of us felt a great pride in what you all are doing, and a real sense that your work not only represents the very best that Berkeley student education has to offer, but it also represents the very best of the true public mission that public education and places like UC Berkeley offer to the nation and the world. So I just want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being part of IGS, for contributing your curiosity and your energy and all your sort of intellectual zeal to some of the biggest problems facing our nations, from the border to political polarization to civic participation. you all, I think, give us hope as we move forward. So want to just thank you very much for coming out here this afternoon and remind you that there are some refreshments out in the courtyard. Please keep celebrating with us and thank you so much for being here.